And I finally came to this place where I felt like I was going to die. So you know how in life there are these moments, these defining moments where things that happen before are different than things that happen after, where life is kind of divided into a before and an after. I was about 17 years old, and I was a good girl. I was involved in church, and I did all the church things. I was in the youth group and extracurricular activities, and went to church every Sunday. My dad was an elder in our church, and I was a good girl. But I got into this relationship with a guy from my youth group, and one thing led to another, and I found myself pregnant at the age of 17. I really didn't do anything about it. I couldn't bring myself to think about anything beyond the conversation with my parents, my dad, who was an elder in the church, and my mom, and I couldn't bring myself to think about anything beyond that conversation of telling them that their daughter had really screwed up in the worst way. I just went straight into denial. I couldn't grasp the situation. And around August, my boyfriend came to me and he said, "This is starting to be obvious, and this is a problem that needs to be dealt with." And I let him take the lead on it. And to me, it wasn't even real. There was just there was such a disconnect between the situation and reality, and so I just let him take the lead, and he said, I think you need to have an abortion. I don't think that I really saw the reality of what I was doing. I saw that there was a problem that needed to be fixed. I used my sister's driver's license because I was under 18, and I didn't know if I was allowed to do this without parental consent. And I took a bag of coins because all I had to pay for it was this bag of coins, and I dumped it all out on this lady's desk. And the next thing I know, I'm laying there in the room, and there's a painting on the wall, this Georgia O'Keeffe painting, very soothing, soft colors. And I remember just kind of losing myself in this painting and becoming completely detached from what was happening in my body. And the pain was excruciating. I couldn't afford a general anesthetic, so I had a local, and the pain was so excruciating, but somehow I was able to disassociate myself from that and just look at this painting and just kind of lose myself in the color. My teacher was 12 weeks pregnant at the time, and she had a book open on her desk. And I had been about 12 weeks pregnant when I had the abortion, and I looked down at this book as I was reaching across the desk. I glanced down, and suddenly I saw this photograph, about this big, of a baby at 12 weeks gestational age. I just stood there transfixed, and I saw these little fingers and these little toes and the little nose and the face, and what I was looking at was a baby. It wasn't a problem that had to be fixed, it was a baby. And it was at that moment that everything just came down and reality hit me like a ton of bricks. And so I looked to men, and I just, I had serial relationships, one after another. And every time I gave myself away, I lost something more. I never received what I was looking for. That void just grew and grew into this ugly, empty, black space. And by the time I graduated from college, I was sitting outside, and I was smoking a cigarette, and I had already spoken to God. The last time I'd spoken to him was when I was a freshman, and I said, "F you, God. I don't want you in my life. I hate you. Everything that I'm experiencing is your fault." I finally came to this place where I felt like I was going to die. And I had been suicidal before, but I also knew that deep down inside, I didn't want to die. And I was sitting there, though, and I was smoking a cigarette, and I just cried out to him for the first time in 4 years, and I said, "God, I don't want to die, but I feel like this pain is going to kill me. I need you to do something." And it was the craziest thing. I heard someone say, "I love you." And I'm looking around in the bushes. I'm thinking, who is here? And there was nobody there. And so I just kind of sat there for a little bit confused, and suddenly I heard it again, "I love you." I realized it was him. God had spoken to me. I no longer felt the weight, that heaviness of death over me. But I always had this dark secret inside. I always had this condemnation, this secret shame, and I just wanted to be normal. And so I just dove into all of the work of being a good Christian, and I dove into the scriptures, and I heard that perfect love casts out fear, and I begged him to know that perfect love. But at the time, I didn't even realize it. I was unable to receive it because I was so filled with shame and regret and remorse and self-condemnation. And it was during that time of just searching and seeking that I started to realize that God speaks to his children, that his sheep know his name, and I started to cultivate the skill of hearing his voice, and started to cultivate the prophetic gift that was in me, and listening for his voice. And it was amazing. We could have conversation. I could actually talk to God, and he would talk back to me. And that's been so amazing. I knew that God could heal me. I'd heard testimonies of God healing people from anxiety, and so I knew that my healing was in him. And then it happened. One day I was actually driving past the abortion clinic, and it happened to be on the day 21 years to the day since I'd had that abortion. And I pulled into the parking lot, and I just cried out, and I prayed, and I just prayed for the people inside, that God would just bless them with the knowledge of how he loves them. And I went home that evening, and I was sitting in quiet, and I was talking with the Lord, and suddenly I just realized, he reminded me of the first time he ever spoke to me. See, I'd always thought that when I heard that audible voice saying, "I love you," I thought that was the first time that God had spoken to me, that I had heard his voice. But he reminded me that the first time I had heard his voice was actually curled up in a ball in the car on the way home from the abortion clinic 21 years ago. And what he said to me, I heard in my heart, but I couldn't quite grasp, and I couldn't accept, and I couldn't receive it at the time. But what he said to me was astounding, because he said, "I don't hold you responsible for this." And I realized how much he loved me. How amazingly extravagant and offensive and scandalous his love is. And I'm not afraid anymore. And I am finally able to look forward and not look back. I look forward with hope and joy and expectation of good things. So I wanted to share my testimony because I feel like there's silence that blankets women who have had abortions, and I feel like the silence needs to be broken. I want people to know that my child was not a problem that needed to be solved. My child was a person whose life was lost, and I am the one that suffers, and the whole world suffers because that person is not here to share what God gave that person to share with the earth. But it is the women, those mothers who carry the guilt and the shame and the condemnation for the rest of their lives. That's who really, really suffers from abortion. And if you are one of those women who is weighted down by guilt and shame and condemnation, I want to tell you that my story is your story. That my story is Jesus, and your story is Jesus. Your story isn't what you've done. Who you are isn't what you've done. Who you are is so beautiful. And I just want to give you hope to realize that you can be free, and you can see yourself the way that God sees you. And you can look at yourself in the mirror and you can say, I am forgiven, I am free, I am beautiful, I am perfect in my Father's eyes. Because He doesn't hold it against you. He doesn't hold anything against you. He doesn't hold you responsible for anything you've done. He just wants to love you.